People have been calling Russia fascist for the past few weeks, and honestly, even before the war has started. But what does it really mean to live in a fascist country? How does one know when the line is crossed and a country becomes a fascist state? Since it's not maths or physics, it's political science. It's very vague and hard to pin down exactly, and there are like a bunch of different definitions to describe a fascist country, a fascist regime. For example, according to Umberto Eco, there are 14 features of a fascist state, and people have talked about this list before, including YouTube. And before the war, Russia was making it halfway, the list. So there was definitely some fascinization of the state, but you couldn't really call it fascist completely. But now things have escalated and changed quite significantly. So I'd like to go down this list and try to determine whether Russia has crossed the line, or is it just a buzzword that people use to describe any country with conservative values. The cult of tradition, characterized by cultural syncretism, even at the risk of internal contradiction. When all truth has already been revealed by tradition, no new learning can occur, only further interpretation and refinement. Russia is not just a state, it is indeed a distinct civilization. For me, it is important to protect our society from some quasi-values. With our citizens, our population have a lot of difficulties accepting. From gay pride parades and same-sex marriages to cannibalism, how Western liberalism continues to liberate the flesh, and why African cannibals Picasso and Amin are now trending. Eating your own kids is in the same category as legalized pedophilia, child euthanasia, pseudo-natural character of homosexuality, or natural one, let the doctors or specialists sort it out. Vladimir Putin in Moscow was talking about Russians' commitment to traditional values. On the other side of Europe, the so-called liberal values were pushed for. MPs at Europe Parliament have been working enthusiastically, tirelessly on something new to corrupt European societies with. They're completely exterminating masculinity in accordance with their gender ideology. This is what it is all about. Well, as they say, fair wins with them. Actually, this is not about women at all. It's about feminists, and a feminist is not a woman. A feminist is some kind of crazy monkey that propagates hatred. Normal families with children being norm are no longer a norm. And a romantic relationship between a man and a woman is not an artistic fashion. The European Court of Human Rights considers Russia law prohibiting propaganda of sodomist relations amongst the underage to be illegitimate. In other words, European judges advocate for corrupting Russian children. Boys and girls are switched for a reason. This is how a new society is created, which is easier to manipulate. If a person cannot understand the simplest thing, who they are from a biological point, how can a more complicated and conscious choice be made? For example, when voting for one or another presidential candidate, they came up with 5 or 6 sexes already. I can't even render. In this sense, traditional values are more stable and more important for millions of people than this liberal idea, in which, in my opinion, is really ceasing to exist. Russian media spews all kind of traditional value BS and perpetuating general sexism, homophobia, patriarchal way of thinking and upbringing. A few years, homophobia was basically legalized, or better to say, homosexuality was made illegal. Technically, they call it gay propaganda, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just a law to make people's lives that belong to the LGBTQ community. It's just impossible and very difficult and sometimes even dangerous in Russia. And the worst thing is that it's actually working. It's not like the government tells us that, we need to believe in that and we all rebel and don't. Russian people as a whole are mostly quite traditional and anti-feminist, sexist, racist, conservative, and homophobic, of course. And it's not something that's ingrained in our DNA or whatever, because, if you leave the country and move somewhere, especially if you're young, you're not gonna hold the same values like what I did, and a lot of people did. And even some people who did stay in Russia, they didn't accept these values as the norm for, whatever reason. And they are capable of absorbing other values like, tolerance, open-mindedness, empathy, and, liberal views. So it is because of the propaganda and the environment and whatever you see on TV, in movies, in TV shows, in series, whatever, influencers write on their Instagram profile or whatever, it all just perpetuates these traditional values, and you grow up knowing them and learning them and being surrounded by them, and it's very hard to not to adopt them. You have to be like really strong and exceptional human being, I guess. I was just lucky enough to leave when I was 19, so I could actually, form my personality in a different country with liberal values. And even young people, like people from my generation, people who went to the same school, to the same college, and this was a good college, that was one of the best colleges in Russia, and they still share these traditional values rhetoric, and they're mostly quite homophobic and believe that feminism is like a swear word. And now these people also support the war. Not technically the war, I guess they just support whatever is going on, because the Russian government is not saying it's a war. They're not calling it the war, they're calling it military operation. So yeah, they're supporting military operation, I guess, to be completely fair. But it's obvious what it is. But maybe it's just obvious to us, I don't know. The rejection of modernism, which views the rationalistic development of Western culture since the Enlightenment as a descent into depravity. Eco distinguishes this form a rejection of superficial technological advancement, as many fascist regimes cite their industrial potency as proof of the vitality of their system. With the new sanctions, it has become abundantly clear that Russia doesn't really produce anything. They're just selling oil and gas, and it doesn't even produce enough basic stuff like potatoes or whatever to feed their public. And every time Russia tried to pursue technological advancement, technological innovation, it failed quite miserably. So everything Russia pursues in this technological arena, including space, either miserably fails or falls short compared to our American and Chinese competitors. So it's hard to disagree with that feature. It's quite clear that Russia is not really supporting science and technology. They're not investing money in it, or enough money in it, compared to the United States, China, and other Western European countries. We are quite behind, but since everyone was available on the market and people could just buy it and it wasn't really a problem, you can be a consumer if you want to. I mean, you shouldn't, but I'm not going to get into that. At least Russian people had access to that. They had access to modern technology, and now with the sanctions, they won't, and that's going to affect them quite drastically, because they're used to it. They've been this democratic country for the past 30 years, and they're used to having access to all these perks and and stuff. And a lot of people built their career on those. We also have Instagram influencer, and people who use Instagram, Facebook, or whatever to promote their business or to promote themselves. And obviously, we also had people who work in IT, and they need technology to work. So that's gonna affect every single person in Russia. Well, that's gonna affect a lot of people in Russia. I guess people are still either in denial or they don't really understand how the market works. I don't know. The cult of action for action's sake, which dictates that action is of value in itself and should be taken without intellectual reflection. This, says Eco, is connected with anti-intellectualism and irrationalism and often manifests in attacks on modern culture and science. Well, that's what propaganda does. It delivers information in very digestible and, easy to grasp kind of chunks. The way they explain away things and problems in Russia is very, very dumbed down. And basically, they just blame everything on the West. If we don't get into details, it's just, it's all the West. The West is after us. And the West is the bad guy, and we are the good guy, and everything we do is in retaliation to the bad guy. So we're the victim, we're not the bad guy here. And I guess if you've lived in this environment for like 30 years, well, I guess 20 years since Putin became president, 22 years, you are used to it. You are used to the government, telling you that you're the victim. And you're used to thinking that. You're used to thinking that, everyone is after us. Everyone is trying to infiltrate our government, infiltrate our people, and give them wrong values, like, gay people or something. And you grew up with this victim mentality. When it turns out that you're actually the bad guy, it's very hard to believe that. It's very hard to accept this as an idea, because you're the victim. You're just doing everything to just save yourselves. You're not actually, you're not the bad guy. You're the good guy. They are the bad guys. So I guess that's why a lot of people still are in a huge denial about that. It's hard to admit that you're the bad guy, especially if you haven't really done anything. Like a regular person living somewhere like in a town in Russia. They didn't start the war. They were just supporting the president, who was telling them that we're good, we're great, we're powerful, we're strong, and the West has these decaying values that we need to say no to and we need to reject. And I guess you start believing in that because, I don't know, why wouldn't you? And now, the entire world hates us because we are the bad guy. And I guess it's just hard to wrap your mind around it, having lived in this environment for, I don't know how long. Disagreement is treason. Fascism devalues intellectual discourse and critical reasoning as barriers to action, as well as out of fear that such analysis will expose the contradictions embodied in a syncretistic faith. This one is sort of a given. I think at this point, everyone has heard of Navalny's story, so I don't think you need a lot of. I'm not going to go into details of that because everyone has talked about it, and it's so tragic. But he's actually only the tip of the iceberg. That's the story that made the biggest splash. Just everyone has heard of it because it was so horrific. It was poisoned. And he was also quite a big name in Russian political arena, although he technically wasn't a part of it. People were fascinated with the story and with his video about Putin's castle. But he's not the only one. Since the war began, they shut down every liberal media we had left. We didn't have a lot, but we did have a few. I guess to just, keep people calm. But since the war has started, they're all gone. Everything's gone. Allegedly because, whatever they posted did not align with the government's message, with the government's agenda. And I mean, on paper it's because they were spreading fake news, but obviously they were doing the opposite. But that's why they are shut down. And we have new legislation that can put you into jail for up to 15 years if you. Actually, the legislation is very vague, so we don't know exactly what it's supposed to be, but First, while the restrictions on speech are provided for by domestic law, the laws in question do not satisfy the qualitative criterion of foreseeability, meaning they are, in many respects, impermissibly vague. The best example of such vagueness is the entirely nebulous reference to grave consequences in Article 207.3, potentially leading to 15 years of imprisonment. Literally nobody, including the authors of this law, can know what consequences exactly can lead to so severe a punishment. But the other offenses are similarly vague. The idea of discrediting the Russian armed forces, which can be interpreted as including any form of criticism. We have had very vague legislation for the past, 10 years at least. The people are kind of used to that, I guess. But yeah, I mean, this vague laws, the point of the vague laws is to be able to put anyone in jail if they become of inconvenience to you. So, and as of now, people who protest or write something on their social media or journalists, they get either fined or receive relatively small sentences. But this legislation is just like a placeholder that you can use that in the future if someone needs to be silenced. And now, with Russia's exit from Council of Europe, following this automatic removal of the ban of capital punishment, we might see new legislation that includes death penalties, and then we are immediately back to 1937 and our beloved Stalin. The collective West is trying to split our society, speculating on military losses, on socioeconomic consequences of sanctions to provoke a civil confrontation in Russia. The goal is one, I've already said this, the destruction of Russia. But any people, and even more so Russian people, will always be able to distinguish true patriots from scums and traitors, and simply spit them out, like a fly that accidentally flew into the mouth. Spit them out. I am convinced that such a natural and necessary cleansing of society will only strengthen our country. Fear of difference, which fascism seeks to exploit and exacerbate, often in a form of racism or an appeal against foreigners and immigrants. Yeah, I guess there's no secret that we also have police brutality and racial profiling. I was shot right here, and I was wearing the Elizarov apparatus for almost a year. Chumahon Karimov is telling about his experience with police officers. In 2016, he was employed as a taxi driver in Moscow suburbs and was late for a pickup with police officer Alexei Baranov. He was drunk, very drunk, and had a gun on him. He started insulting me, saying I was late, I was a churka. The police officer was aggressive, so he had to defend himself. A few friends arrived to help the officer, and they came with guns. Churka, I'll kill you. You're all disturbing us here. And he started beating me up. So I got scared because he wanted to shoot me, so I tried to take the gun from his hands. And the gun went off into my leg. He wanted to murder me. Every time when I visit Moscow, where my family lives, and I use subway, there are always police officers on the station. I don't know why. I don't know what they're doing there. Just always there. It hasn't been like that when I was a child, by the way. When I used subway to go to school in 2007, it wasn't like that. So I guess that's new. Literally this summer I went to Russia to get vaccinated, and every station there were a bunch of police officers just randomly stopping men who don't look Slavic. I don't know how else to put it. People from Chechnya, Dagestan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and so on. just people who don't look like me, not like people who know white people. Basically, everyone who isn't white, and literally everyone. I'm not even exaggerating. Like, they just stopped everyone, and they took them somewhere. I don't know where. I can't follow them. I don't really know what's going on because it was happening before for sure, but I've never seen that to such extent. And literally every station I went to, that was happening. And I've never been stopped and searched and taken somewhere because, I'm white. I mean, unless I go on a protest, then I'm gonna be stopped and taken to the police station because I will be deemed as the enemy of Russia. But just walking down the street, I wouldn't be stopped based on my skin colors. Russia is very racist, and I think everyone has also seen that in Ukraine, when they were evacuating people, and people of color had difficulties leaving Ukraine. They were not prioritized. And a lot of them were still there. They can't leave. They can't go home. And yeah, that's racism too, of course. We're both racist. I mean, we both come from the same, historical background. Both Russia and Ukraine are racist, unfortunately. Appeal to frustrated middle class, fearing economic pressure from the demands and aspirations of lower social groups. Fascism is born out of low class status and financial frustrations. When we look at people who support the war in Russia and current Putin's regime, they're mostly come from lower class. Not exclusively, of course. There's still quite a lot of people in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other large cities that support the war. But the majority of people who are on board with that do live in like smaller towns, villages, and usually don't have the education, the access to education. Also, they don't have the ability to just go to Europe for a weekend or a few weeks. They can't even go to like Turkey or Egypt. They just go to their summer house or dacha and just drink vodka there. And they also have nothing better to do really, and they also can't afford to do anything better, and sometimes they don't even want to do anything better because that's their life. They're used to it. That's what they know. And they don't care about iPhones or McDonald's or Nike or IKEA. Like, they don't care about those companies and the products that these companies sell in the Russian market. They weren't really the consumers of these companies before, mostly because they couldn't even afford them. McDonald's is not as cheap as buying like 2 kilos of potatoes and just eating potatoes for a week. It's still quite expensive, and I mean, not to mention iPhones or clothes, like brand clothes. It's just out of the question. For them, we're fighting for our dignity, for our unique path. This alleged Russian unique path is just up to here already. Our place in history, our territories that we own, and if they have to cut down their expenses, and I don't know what's cheaper than potatoes, Jesus Christ, but they have to cut down their expenses and not eat as well as they used to, and they never did, but whatever. For a few years, then it's worth it because they're fighting for this idea of Russians grandiose, I guess. And I guess that's why the West is having problems understanding why the sanctions aren't working on Russian people. They're like, we're doing whatever we can. Russians can't eat in McDonald's now. Russians can't, travel. Russians have lost their money. Why isn't that working? Isn't that what the life is about? Having your access to financial opportunities and, striving to forward your career and, no. You're taking it very, very, very wrong. This is definitely not what they're thinking about or ever thought about. They are more than okay with, living in a state that is so strong and powerful and does not surround to these, decaying values of the West. The government that everyone fears and now literally fears, because who knows what he can do. They are more than okay with that. They actually want that. Like that's their values. Obsession with a plot and the hyping up of the enemy threat. This often combines an appeal to xenophobia with a fear of disloyalty and sabotage from marginalized groups living within the society. Eco also cites Pat Robinson's book, The New World Order, as a prominent example of a plot obsession. Russians watch literally hours of political content on the national TV, and even before the war, it was literally hours and hours, 5-6 hours a day. And now they've canceled all entertainment programs and they're only showing the political discussions on TV, exclusively political shows. Even before the war and especially now, they devote 95% of their time to Ukraine and how it's fascist and Nazi and anti-Russian and anti-democratic, and how it has sold out to America, and how the United States is just basically operating from inside of Ukraine and trying to destroy Russia from within, or whatever. And they aren't stopping now, because now the goal is to dehumanize the enemy. That's how in the 30s and the 40s Nazis convinced Germans to kill Jewish people and Slavic people, Gypsy people, basically everyone who's not Aryan enough, by dehumanizing the enemy, by saying that this is not a human being, this is a monster and an Untermensch, that they are evil people and deserve to be distinguished, and that's how you convince a regular person to shoot, to kill, because a regular person is not gonna want to murder other people. It's inconceivable. But if you tell them that this is not people, this is not a human being, this is a monster, with these terrible values, then it's a lot easier to pull the trigger. And they're just crafting newer and newer plot stories every day. Now they have discovered 30 biolabs that produce bioweapons against Russian people.
Russia and Ukraine have launched a volley of claims and counterclaims. It's becoming impossible really to verify any of it. The latest allegation is this: bioweapons. Russia claims it has uncovered 30 biolabs in Ukraine, 30 biolabs in Ukraine. What happened to these labs? What happened at these labs, rather? According to Russia, weaponization. They were making biological weapons. They claim America was developing bioweapons in Ukraine. Listen to this.
It is obvious that in the wake of the special military operation, the Pentagon started having serious concerns about secret biological experiments uncovered on the Ukrainian territory. The uncovered documents confirm that components for chemical weapons were developed in Ukrainian biolabs in immediate proximity to Russia.
30 labs with incriminating documents. That's what Russia claims. These documents allegedly expose America's operation to develop bioweapons, specifically the plague, anthrax, and rabbit fever. Did they also find any stockpiles? Well, this is where things get interesting. Russia claims Ukraine destroyed the entire stock last month. Listen to this.
During the course of the special military operation, facts were uncovered of the Kiev regime mopping up traces of military biological programs under development in Ukraine, financed by the US Defense Ministry.
Sounds a bit convenient, doesn't it? If the stockpile was destroyed, why not the documents? Why would Ukraine leave incriminating papers lying around? It simply doesn't add up.
I mean, the entire story is bizarre on so many levels. Obviously, first of all, like, what? And even if you buy into this narrative for a second to just try to understand the logic behind it, they're producing, like Americans in Ukraine and biolabs producing bioweapons that is supposed to kill or only Russian people. But at the same time, what Putin says is that Russians and Ukrainians are one nation. So how's it gonna distinguish? And not to say that, I mean, we're all Slavic people in Russia, in Poland, in Slovakia, Slovenia, Ukraine, Belarus. Like we're all Slavic people. How's this virus gonna distinguish between us? Is it like gonna ask for our passports, or is it gonna dissect our genome and see if the Z swastika is there? How is it gonna do that? It's just the entire thing is so insane that, I mean, who's gonna buy into that? I don't know. How far removed do you have to be from biology to actually believe that for even a second? I'm not really an expert in biology, no way. I've actually been kind of bad in biology in high school, to be honest. My teacher was super religious and she was talking about religion to us. I don't know. But still, it just sounds ridiculous on so many levels. It's just insane. And by the way, what is up with a swastika thing? Like the Z, the Russian Z, is like I don't know if you haven't heard of it. I'm pretty sure you have. It's been like everywhere. This is like the sign that Russian government wants us to use to support, to express their support. And some cities have changed their names to include the Z. Instead of Russian Z, we have a letter for Z, the Cyrillic letter, and they just substituting the Russian Z with the Latin Z, as a sign of support. And when you watch these, photographs with people putting the signs on like whatever, it resembles swastika so much that you can't help but think, but either like trolling us. There's no way they did not recognize the resemblance, like whoever is in charge of this thing. There's no way they didn't notice that it looks so closely like swastika. There's no way they didn't notice that. There's no way they didn't catch that. Are they trolling us? Are they for real? I don't understand that. This is the craziest thing. And then they they hold these parades and they do this hand movement that looks like exactly like what Germans used to do, like this Sieg Heil movement. What? All these people who are in charge, they were born in like 50s and 60s. They remember it very, very well because the war has just ended. They remember all of that a lot better than I do. I was born in the 90s. There's no way they don't see that. Why are they doing that? It's just insane. I hope one day we're gonna learn. There's gonna be some information, some archives or whatever, because who's trolling us? Someone's trolling us. Someone's trolling us all. Fascist societies rhetorically cast their enemies as at the same time too strong and too weak. On the other hand, fascists play up the power of certain disfavored elites to encourage in their followers a sense of grievance and humiliation. On the other hand, fascist leaders point to the decadence of those elites as proof of their ultimate feebleness in the face of an overwhelming popular will. Okay, the enemy is too strong and too weak at the same time, which, if we take Ukraine as an example, it is strong in a sense that it has America on their side, even before the war, Russian message was that Americans are working with Ukraine to, infiltrate Russia and infect them with, there's bad values and destroy Russia and, whatever. So it is strong, but at the same time, Putin was convinced that it would be like a 3-day war. So even though the rhetoric is that Ukraine is strong and needs to be destroyed because it is the bad guy, at the same time, they're like, it's gonna be easy. It's gonna be just a few days. We're not gonna invade. We're not gonna do any harm, any huge harm. And it's been a month, and it's not even nowhere near the end. But they're still saying that it's all going according to the plan. We're good. That's what they're saying on Russian TV. Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy because life is a permanent warfare. There must always be an enemy to fight. Both fascist Germany under Hitler and Italy under Mussolini worked first to organize and clean up their respective countries and then build the war machines that they later intended to and did use despite Germany being under restrictions of the Versailles Treaty to not build a military force. This principle leads to a fundamental contradiction within fascism, the incompatibility to ultimate triumph with perpetual war. Yeah, as I said before, they're not fighting for anything in particular, like no material gains, nothing really of any value, because they are fighting to fight. They're fighting to just be fighting. The sole purpose of this war is just, to show the world that we are superior, that we are powerful, that we are better than everyone, to make people fear Russia and Putin, especially countries that, neighbor Russia, like Baltic states, Poland, Slovakia, countries who are the next on the list. And there's no end to this, unless someone puts an end to this. There's no end to this because there's no point to this war. What is really the point? We still don't know. Putin still did not disclose any goals. What are we fighting for? When is the war gonna end? What needs to be done and achieved to end this war? And the reason why it's been so vague is because he doesn't know. Because there's no point to that. It's just to show, how cool we are. It's pointless. And, everything can be negotiated in just a civil way without shedding any blood. So there's no point. You just need to, convince people to fight, to just be fighting. That's it. Contempt for the weak, which is uncomfortably married to the chauvinistic popular elitism, in which every member of society is superior to outsiders by virtue of belonging to the in-group. Eco sees in these attitudes the root of a deep tension in the fundamentally hierarchical structures of fascist policies, as they encourage leaders to despise their underlings up to the ultimate leader who holds the whole country in contempt for having allowed him to undertake it by force. Just a few days, they organized this huge festival in Moscow in support. Technically, the festival was devoted to celebrate 8 years since Crimea annexation. They didn't call it annexation, of course, but that's what this technically was about. But basically, it was just a bunch of people who support Putin and people who were forced to go there because they are in vulnerable positions. They were students, it's schools and colleges, and people who work for the government. And not all people who work for the government are evil and support Putin. Some of them are just teachers, and technically they depend on the government, but they're not working for the government, right? And a lot of people like that were forced to go there. A lot of people didn't, of course, and they got expelled or fired, or they might be expelled and fired in the future. They might face other repercussions. So not to say everyone sold out, but some people had to, especially teachers who have families to feed. And I guess that's the group that it's supposed to be like a part of this in-group elite society that is like fighting against the enemies of Russia, like myself. I am officially the enemy now because I'm against the war, and I say the word war out loud, so that's a big no-no. Namely, to liberate the people from this genocide, of these sufferings. This is the main reason, motive, and goal of the military operation, which we have launched in the Donbass and Ukraine. This is what the goal is. The best proof is how our boys are fighting at this special military operation, shoulder to shoulder. They help and support each other. If needed, they cover comrade in arms from bullets on battlefield with their own bodies, as if he was their own brother. We haven't seen such a unity for a long time. Everybody is educated to become a hero, which leads to the embrace of a cult of death. As Eco observes, our fascist hero is impatient to die. In his impatience, he more frequently sends other people to death. Thousands of Russian soldiers, including conscripts that were supposed to only serve like 1 year, because this is mandatory in Russia, which is another disgusting thing. And they were sent to fight the war, although in the beginning Putin said that no conscripts would participate in this war. It's only going to be like soldiers who work on contract. But then a few weeks after the war had started, it was clear that it was not true. And they're like super young, like 18, 19, 20, like ridiculously young soldiers who are also, they were just sent to army because it's obligatory. But a lot of these people don't want to be a part of army or war. It's going to traumatize them for quite a long time, and obviously a lot of them are dying. And according to Russian military information, it's about 500 people, but if we look at other numbers, it's like goes from 3,000 to 7,000 to 10,000. I haven't seen larger numbers than that, and obviously we don't know what to believe right now. There's just no way to prove that. We're gonna learn more about it once the war has ended. One such assessment found that approximately 7,000 Russian troops have been killed so far, said one of the sources. But that figure, first reported by the New York Times, is on the higher end of the US estimates, which vary because of the US and its allies have no precise way of counting casualties. Some estimates place the number of Russian troops killed in Ukraine at about 3,000, whereas others suggest more than 10,000 have been killed. But knowing Russian government, they're probably lowering the numbers. Not to say 500 is already way too much for just a 4-week-long war, but it is very likely that the number is actually a lot higher than that. In a few weeks of this Ukrainian war, there have been more casualties than over the years of the wars in Chechnya and Afghanistan. Machismo, which sublimates the difficult work of permanent war and heroism into the sexual sphere. Fascists thus hold both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits from chastity to homosexuality. I guess I don't have to tell you that Russia is homophobic and sexist. The cult of masculinity is at its peak in Russia, and it has been perpetuated over the decades before. By the way, all your alpha males in in the West with your stupid podcasts, what are you still doing in your beta male, gay, non-binary Americas. Come to Russia. It's heaven for you. You're gonna love it there. It's just ideal. You're gonna be praised for being all, macho and strong and, sexist and telling women what to do and what not to say, and, you're gonna be adored. What are you doing there? Just come to Russia. And Putin is the prototype of this, manliness. And every man should strive to become like Putin, and every woman should strive to marry someone like Putin because he's so great. He's like, you've probably seen all the pictures with him like on a horse and with a gun, and he's always shirtless for some reason, just the douchiest thing you can ever do. But in reality, he's an old, sick man who's been sitting in his bunker for the last 2 years, and even people who have been vaccinated and tested still had to quarantine for 2 weeks in order to see him. And if they didn't want to do that, or Putin still didn't want to see them even though they have been quarantined, he would just have video calls. He has been there for 2 years, and he hasn't really left it very often. Maybe a few times. For the rally in Moscow a couple of days ago. But most of the time he's just sitting there. And he's a hypochondriac, weak and pathetic man. He's just laughable, especially the juxtaposition to Zelensky, who is just, out there with soldiers. He's still in Ukraine. He's not obviously he's not actively fighting. He's the president, but he is very much involved, and you can see that, even if maybe some of it is a little performative. It doesn't matter. He's still there, and Putin is just in his bunker, and we're still supposed to think that we have this strong and powerful president. Are you kidding me? And sexism, I talked about it in one of my videos about Haley Gamble and how our media just was so disgusting, how they talked about that interview, and even how Putin treated her during that interview was crossing the line a little bit.
Now the Russian media is going ape over Hadley's long legs and sky-high stiletto heels. One Russian TV news anchor, a prominent Kremlin mouthpiece, said that the 39-year-old journalist squeezed herself into a little black dress. Her legs were caked in an oily shimmer. They claimed she was licking her lips and rolling out her tongue during the interview and positioning herself as a sex object. The Russians also complained that she ran her fingers through her hair and waved her leg out at Putin.
The reporter didn't pull any punches, and Putin clearly wasn't used to tough questions from journalists, especially women. At one point, things got a little tense.
A beautiful woman, but I'm saying one thing to you and you are saying a different thing to me, as if you have not heard what I said.
Hadley Gamble is answering her Russian critics with humor, posting this photo with the front page of a Russian newspaper.
And I grew up in that country. I know how sexist it is. I know it firsthand. I've never heard so many people telling me what to do with my body. That I should have kids, that I should get married, that I should have, this kind of the womanly job, that I shouldn't dress this way, I shouldn't wear makeup, I'm not wearing enough makeup, or I'm wearing too much makeup, or, it's just, not to say you never encounter that anywhere else. You do, for sure. But I've never met so much of it anywhere else. Again, last summer, I spent a few weeks in Russia when I was getting vaccinated. I had to. It was actually the longest time I spent in Russia since 2012. And it was, but whatever. I had to do it to get vaccinated. And some random dudes would just tell me that, that my lifestyle is wrong, and that I'm supposed to procreate because, we have a demographic crisis in Russia, and somehow it's my responsibility to do something about it. It's just, and sometimes I see it in the comments to my videos, which is quite annoying, to be honest. But it's different when it's face to face. You see all kinds of shit on the internet, and you hear, and it's a lot easier to kind of just whatever. But when you see that, like when someone tells you that to your face, it's harder to not react and to just let it go. Selective populism, the people conceived monolithically have a common will, distinct from and superior to the viewpoint of any individual. As no mass of people can ever be truly unanimous, the leader holds himself out as an interpreter of the popular will, though truly he dictates it. Fascists use this concept to delegitimize democratic institutions they accuse of no longer presenting the voice of the people. The leader is executing what people want, but in reality it's not what they want, it's what they're told they want on TV and propaganda and blah blah blah. I mean, we've kind of been through that already. This is a good representation of what's going on. People are being told what they need to want, and the glory president delivers it. Newspeak. Fascism employs and promotes an impoverished vocabulary in order to limit critical reasoning. Media already cannot use the word war in their rhetoric. They are supposed to use military operation. They can't say war. It's against the law and against the constitution, but who cares about constitution? Putin can just go ahead and change it at any time. And Putin is known to use derogatory terms that stand out compared to Western leaders, except for Trump, of course, but he's an imbecile, so it doesn't count. So is Russia fascist? I'm not a political expert, so I can't really make any statements that can be taken seriously. And just a month ago, as I said in the beginning, this video wouldn't have existed because the answer would have been no, not really. Is it moving? Is it, going towards this goal of, becoming fascist? Is it going to become fascist if it stays on this lane? Yes, but is it fascist? The answer would have been no. But now, just over the course of a few weeks, the situation changed so drastically that it's hard to say no. And Umberto Eco is not the only person who tried to define a fascist state. There are actually quite a lot of different definitions. I'm not gonna go through all of them because this video would be like 10 hours long. And but I like this list because first of all, it's used quite often. And it's also quite, simple for the identification of signs of a fascist state. So what does it mean for the future of the Russian government? I don't know if you care about the future of the Russian government. I do, because my family still lives there. I hope they're gonna leave soon, but they're still there. They're still there. So what does it mean for the future? Even when the war ends with most likely, not most likely, 100% Putin claiming that he won and he's just gonna come up with whatever he won, is gonna make something up and say, here, that's what we wanted to do and we won, so good for us. And people who are unhappy with the current regime, they're gonna stay unhappy, obviously. They're gonna become even happier, I guess. And people who are happy with the regime and support Putin now, they're gonna notice the changes of their financial state, and they're gonna join the this army of unhappy people. Some aren't gonna join, but a lot of them are, in order to stop this crisis and to hold people together and not to allow them to protest and do anything against the government. Putin is going to need some really harsh repressions, some harsh constraints, and this is when Putin's Stalinification will be complete.